Hey, class, wanted to, I was trying to respond to all of our week three discussion and try and answer. It's going to take me like a million years. So instead of sitting here writing, because I got to got to build an assignment tonight. So you have something to kind of work on this week. I wanted to just get in here and actually directly answer. I think it's a little bit easier. So great, a lot of great questions. I was actually really stoked to see how interested you guys all were in it. It was a long PowerPoint presentation. Let me just expand this a little bit so hopefully you can still see me. Should be off in the corner here. But it was a long presentation. I think like 56 pages. That's a long PowerPoint, but we covered a lot of stuff. And again, I'm just going to read everything that you all wrote, and then I'll even if I answered it in text, I'll just respond to it. A couple things here. I think Magali, and I apologize if I'm butchering your names. I'm so sorry. It is what it is. Since we don't have like face to face, I don't really know how to always pronounce everyone's name, so just bear with me. I'm sorry. My last name, they used to call me Spaghetti. That was kind of what that's how I got called. So not that doesn't make it right. Just saying, I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to call anyone Spaghetti. All right. So let's see. The first one, yeah, a question that came up for me is whether the numbers for the different bioenergetic systems or bioenergetic systems apply similarly to women. And if having a workout routine that uses all three systems is the most optimal for general health. Also, if skim milk is the ideal post-workout, what is the most ideal pre-workout snack meal nutrition option for both men and women? I said one question. It's one question, but I will answer them all though. All right. So first thing comes up. There are no differences between men and women in bioenergetics. So I really want us to step away from the idea that men and women, and I'm using the binary here. I know that there's trans, there's all sorts of other dynamics at play. And actually, what's really interesting about the exercise physiology of folks who are doing gender confirmation, therapy, the cool thing is that the endocrine system, the testosterone, the progesterone, the estrogen, all of these things really dramatically change the person from the inside out. And that's kind of a side conversation, smaller population. But generally, I want to just say in the cis male, cis female, we don't train any differently. We just don't. And there is a dogmatic stigma. I don't know if it's stigma. There is a dogmatism that historically comes with fitness. One of the courses that I've been taking in my current doctorate program is really looking at what we call special population training. So disease state, youth, different types of diseases, metabolic diseases, cancers. Like, how do we train? Do we train? Is it appropriate to train? And usually we're talking about resistance training. For most of the situations, Down syndrome, what else did we cover? We covered almost every kind of variation, and we had to kind of go through and really look at the literature and research. Females fall into the special population category as well, only because women are at a little bit higher risk of what's called the athlete triad. And the triad is basically this triangle that includes bone mineral density, um, eating disorders, and should know this. I just went through the course. It'll come to me. Bone mineral density, eating disorders, and I believe it must be menstruation. And I got to pull this up, and I can't believe I'm totally blanking on it. But what I wanted to get to was the course was really geared towards understanding some of the social constructs that have existed, at least in the United States, that altered the way women perceive, and society at large has perceived the way, quote unquote, women should be training. There is a historical period in the United States when women were training. It was considered unsafe, too masculine, a ton of stigma around doing things that, quote unquote, men are doing. Remember, too, that fitness and exercise and weight training as a strength and conditioning concept did not even become a real thing really until the 70s. And it was thought that if you get too muscular, you'll be too big and bulky, you won't be able to move fast. Obviously, that's been blown out of the water every which way from Friday. But the stigma stuck with women, and in particular, what they would do was they would make sports different. So here's a perfect example: tennis. If you look at the match, like the championship levels for men and women's tennis, women play less sets. They're best of 3. Men play best of 5. And this is a relic of the old way of thinking that women can't train as much because they're more fragile. It will be problematic for their having children. Obviously, all of the female dynamics that go along with that will be negatively influenced. And doctors were promoting this. In fact, it was said, oh, no exercise, you're pregnant, can't do it. Like, so all of this stuff has been refuted. But there is this stigma or this misconception that still permeates. It's at a lower level now than it's ever been. But this idea that women are supposed to train differently because we're physiologically different than men. We are 99.9% the same. The big difference is some structural difference and the hormonal difference. But here's the thing: during menstruation for women, and I was talking about this today in our intro to kinesiology course. During menstruation, women actually generate more growth hormone, and it actually is an optimal time to be training. Now, it might not be the most fun to train at that point, but being savvy with what's going on with the exercise physiology and from a hormonal perspective allows us access a window into how we can manipulate training variables to optimize men, women, whomever, to perform to the best of their ability. And there's so much evidence out there at this point about how we can tweak some of these things. But I want to be very clear: bioenergetics doesn't care what gender, orientation, religion, creed, anything, doesn't care. It works the same way. So I'm not, and I hope I'm not coming across as beating up on you at all. That's not my intention, but I want to be very clear. Men and women should train very similarly when we're talking about resistance training and cardiovascular training. And, there may be some times throughout the month, depending on menstruation, we might make some adjustments because of uncomfortability, because of not feeling like as wanting to be as active or feeling like you want to participate as much. But resistance training is such an incredible fountain of youth. And when we look at the gambit of metabolic disorders, medical disorders, resistance training becomes such a critical thing, especially as we age, because it increases bone mineral density. So that's a big deal for women. And it also increases hormone concentrations, overall strength. It fights against sort of this decline that happens as we age. And I think I've got to cover aging and the changes in exercise physiology as we age, because resistance training becomes a fountain of youth. So this is a long, and I will not be this long with all of your answers. I'm sorry, everyone, but this is the first one. So Magali, I apologize. There is no difference. Energy systems are the same for men and women. And so general health. So you ask about, well, what should we focus on one for general health? That depends on what your definition of general health is. If I have someone who's really interested in resistance training, maximal effort resistance training, they're going to be in the phosphagen system. They might not do a lot of cardio, because this is the other piece. If you remember the very end of the lecture, remember that if we have more mitochondria inside of our muscle fibers, we will crowd out the ability for cross-sectional protein fibers. Those are two competing structural requirements. More mitochondria for the oxidative system, more cross-bridging really was what makes you stronger, and is going to predominantly rely on the creatine phosphate system, the CP system. So health is going to be kind of up to you. There is no, the National Institute of Health and all of our federal organizations don't say, no, you got to have your bioenergetics need to be, we don't even get into bioenergetics. We just say, hey, do some cardio, do some strength training, get 150 minutes per week. It comes down to your preference. Some people are going to prefer to lift weights, heavy weights. Some people are going to prefer to do more cross training. I would say if you want to be generally overall fit and kind of have the best of all worlds, resistance training, cardio, some steady state cardio, every once in a while do some sprinting cardio. but also you want to partake in activities that you're going to enjoy that are sustainable for a long-term commitment to your overall health, because the bottom line is we need that 150 minutes of moderate physical activity to maintain and prevent, maintain our health and prevent long-term chronic complications or chronic illness. If skim chocolate milk is the ideal post-workout, what is the most ideal pre-workout snack meal nutrition option for both men and women? Okay, I'm going to pretend men and women aren't there, because we're going to treat each other the same. And that's all preferential. The one thing you would want to avoid, so whatever your palate is fine. But the one thing you would want to avoid is high fat. You do not want to have high fat, because fat in our diet slows down the digestive process. It requires more active digestion. And if you start to pool blood at your stomach and intestines through the digestive process, it actually triggers your parasympathetic nervous system, sort of like relaxation, digestion, kind of when we eat a good meal, we want to fall asleep. And what you're really trying to do, take advantage of, is the sympathetic nervous system, which is going to be like fight or flight. Like, we're active, we're moving, we're doing all this stuff. So that's a you're kind of competing with itself. If you have extra fat in that pre-workout meal, it can bog you down. Some people can get nauseous and throw up. So I would recommend, if you're going to do anything, you want to have mostly carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, and it's all going to come down to your palate. Some people, you're going to know in the class, some of you probably don't like to eat at all before you work out. I don't usually like to eat anything before I work out. I just don't like feeling like I have something going on in my stomach. So preferentially, it's up to you. If you're going to go 2 hours or greater in a workout, you're going to need to have some quick acting carbohydrates. If you're consistently working out for 2 hours or longer, which we can argue might not be the best thing from a resistance training perspective. But if you're doing, especially if you're in a tournament or something where you're playing lots of games in a day, after 2 hours, you have to have simple carbohydrates. That's why Gatorade exists. That's when you need Gatorade, not before 2 hours, but after 2 hours, to replace your glycogen in your glucose stores that are going to be depleted from utilizing the glycolytic energy system. All right, moving on. Will talked about he felt some discomfort in his abdomen area. We talked about this in class, and so it only happens. Will told me when he's really first running, has been deconditioned for a little bit, hasn't been running, and then for a day or so, he'll feel some discomfort in his obliques. I told Will, when we run, so imagine my lower body, upper body, it's this contralateral pattern, this pattern that goes across the body. And so what happens is he's probably getting some anti-rotation. He's probably getting some engagement in the core. So the muscles are kind of turning on, re-engaging. And if they haven't done that in some time, that's most likely what he's experiencing. If it lasts, I said, you need to go to the doctor. I told him, I said, well, if it lasts more than one time, go to the doctor. I don't know what it is. Most likely though, because that's what he said, it's only one time. Usually when he's been out of shape or hasn't been practicing his runs or doing his runs, then he partakes, and then he doesn't feel it the next couple of times he goes. So I would say, it's probably just that contralateral pattern. The obliques are getting engaged and they're working a little bit differently. Michael, the fact that exercise intensity and duration can be adjusted as factors to tap into certain energy systems that will be utilized in specific activities. And how can you aim to make goals towards these certain systems and activities? So great question. I think I should have talked about that a little bit more. I'm not the greatest at this. There are actually wonderful, talented strength and conditioning folks out there that can determine, based on, and many of us have experienced this over the course of a game. Let's use football, let's use soccer, let's use whatever. I played lacrosse in college. Yes, I was a Division I athlete in college. So I played lacrosse, which is a field sport. Some of us are like, if we're not in great shape or we're halfway decent shape, we'll find that towards the end of the game that we really can't generate a lot of cardiovascular, we're just dog tired. And so we could look at your slow glycolysis and fast glycolysis. Your oxidative system can be trained really kind of steady state, kind of doing long distance tempo runs and things of that nature. Probably want to do some sprinting work in there as well. But the glycolytic and slow glycolysis and fast glycolysis systems can be trained based on intensity. So if you look at the very end of the presentation, you're going to see different exercise, different athletic exercise or athletic events, and the energy system that it uses. And so the challenge, and this is where I don't really know how to structure it optimally, is that the intensity, you have to be pushing a certain percentage of max effort. So sprinting would be full phosphagen. For 15 seconds, we can go. I know it says 30, but most of us, by the time we're at 15, if we're in really good shape, we're already tapping into fast glycolysis. So you would probably want to be going pretty close to a pretty heavy resistance, full volition, but not quite max because you're not going to be able to do it for that minute, 2 minutes. And then you would do bouts of that. Rest, do it again. Rest, do it again. We want to maximize that would be fast glycolysis. Slow glycolysis goes a little bit longer and is a little less intense, but it's more intense than the oxidative system. So you would look at the estimated variables of intensity that you would be using and the duration. And this can be done on a bike. I've seen it done on a bicycle where you crank the resistance up to a certain percentage. You'd have to figure out kind of roughly where your percentages are. And you'd want to keep your heart rate at a certain level and not supersede that, because then we would be training into your specific energy system. So energy system development is something that a strength and conditioning coach absolutely does. Good personal trainers that are really into this stuff will also be able to do it. I would just Google energy system development protocols. It's all going to depend on your current conditioning to determine what is the intensity and the maximum effort time-wise that you can do. So as you get into better shape, those variables are going to constantly be changing. It is what it is. Good question, though. Yvette, I found this lecture very interesting because I'm pretty familiar with some of the metabolic pathways, but I never tried to understand them in an active way. Does this mean that different systems are used based on intensities of workouts and are some skipped or can be combined? So to kind of go back to what I just said, Yvette, nothing skipped. Remember, all energy systems turn on at the same time. Glycolysis and oxidative take more time to actually prime up, whereas phosphagen instantaneously available. The others, you get 6 ATP and then 10 ATP, and then you get 34 ATP out of oxidative. So you get a lot more energy with those with the systems that take longer to ramp up. They kind of have to come online. You don't skip them. The only time you might kind of quasi skip is if, and even then I would say no, because the systems are on. It's just whether or not you're actually tapping into it based on the intensity. So think about playing soccer, you're jogging, the ball's at the other side of the pitch, you're doing your thing, you're kind of back, you're not really working too hard. All of a sudden the ball's coming your way. Now you start to go a little fast. Oh, now you got to play defense on this guy, right? Now you're going to sprint to meet the ball. So now you might have just jumped from oxidative into fast glycolysis, maybe eat a little bit of phosphagen, and then all of a sudden the ball gets kicked away, and then boom, you just stop. And now you're just jogging again. You might go right back into oxidative. You maybe have never hit that slow glycolysis. But the reality is it's not something that we can think about and control. So I wouldn't overthink, am I in it? Am I not in it? Unless you really have some fatigue that you're looking to develop over the course of a game. And then we have to go back to that previous question about how do I train my energy systems? Good question. All right. Gisette, there was one part in the lecture that really stood out to me, and it was excess post-oxygen consumption, EPOC, and how it keeps the metabolism elevated longer after workout, especially after intense resistance training. I found it surprising that the body can continue to burn calories for up to 72 hours from just one session. Yes, it can. Research shows that it can, but it's got to be really intense exercise. This made me kind of question if shorter, more intense workouts can lead to greater fat loss and metabolic benefits. Why do so many still rely on long, steady state cardio for weight loss? Gisette, I wish I could answer that question, but I want to invite you all to think about your fitness experiences in the gym. Most of the stuff in the gym is actually not correct. And a lot of it is, if I was to go to design a gym, I would never design a gym like 24-hour fitness with 8 million machines, very little space. My gym would be open, more sports performance oriented. So for some of you that have come to LACC, if you haven't checked out our weight room, I really encourage you. I should probably do a little mini tour of that for you guys to show you what we have. It's not the biggest facility, but it's wide open. And the reason for that is I want people to move around. So there is a lot of old dogmatic ways of thinking. And in fact, much of the cardiovascular equipment back in the day, And I still see it from time to time. If it's old enough, they'll have this fat burning zone, and they'll say your age, and they'll say where your target heart range should be to maximize your fat burning zone. Well, it's true. Oxidative energy system relies on fat and oxygen, and that's going to be your primary fuel source. The downside of steady state is once you're done with your steady state, as I talked about, right, that calorie burn is kind of pretty much stopped. And the benefit really is in the metabolic disruptive dynamic, because EPOC comes into play and you can have that enhanced metabolism for up to 72 hours. So we're fighting, honestly, just a lot of misinformation. I mean, this is you're preaching to the choir, because this is my love, my passion is to bring exercise science to the masses, to say that, hey, the stuff that you learned from your PE coach is probably wrong, or your PE, your coach. And we as kinesiologists and exercise scientists don't get as much credit in the general populace, and even personal trainers to some extent. There's a very limited depth of knowledge to get certified. You got to pass a certification exam with a 70% or better, so you can get a C minus. You basically are tested on 4 domains, some of which don't really cover, most of which doesn't cover exercise science. Some of it does, but it's usually like client safety, programming, pretty much, and like a participant, like initial like intake and motivational interviewing and all this stuff. A little bit on exercise science, but not a ton. So we're getting a lot of people that are in our industry that really probably don't have that much depth of knowledge. They can get certified with a C minus, and I always joke you can go train my grandmother. Having really, even though you might have talked about some medical stuff in your textbook, you probably don't remember it because you're not really tested on it all that much. So we're playing this game of misinformation. And Gisette, to your point, I think, it's up to you guys to start to correct the world, because you're going to be participating in fitness out there. High intensity is way more effective, especially as a fat loss perspective, but also benefits your VO2 max. So your conditioning is going to improve as well. I would argue that if you're really going to do, I'm not going to argue, this is what we know. If you're going to do fat loss programming, you would want to do kind of circuit training resistance exercise. And I might have already said this, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, where we're doing, 8 to 12 repetitions of a weight, like a push and then a pull and then a squat or a hinge. And you're doing these big circuits. And by the time I get to the 12th rep, if that's the rep scheme for the day, it's freaking hard. That's going to teach my tissues to not only grow, it's also going to it's going to also have a metabolic effect, because when I'm pushing, I've got blood in my pecs, my shoulders, my tricep. Then I immediately do a pull. Now the blood has to go in my biceps and my lats and my rhomboids. And then I'm going to do a squat. And now all the blood's got to kind of go down to my lower body. You're taking advantage of that blood shunting, and that is bang for buck way better, because you're going to build muscle mass as well. Let's see, people don't understand, or it feels harder to stand. So, the other thing to this too is that's not a day one exercise program, right? Someone who's deconditioned cannot jump in and do metabolic circuits with resistance training with relatively heavy weight. That's got to be something that they slowly build up to. And we need to develop a base conditioning level before we could even expose someone to that, because we don't want them to throw up. We don't want them to hate exercise. We have to get some success, some wins. Every session should have a win in it. It should be challenging to some extent, but the person needs to feel like there's a win in there for them, so that they want to come back and get better, and they want to come back and learn more. I think that's us as the fitness industry to be better. This is really my big push for licensing for personal trainers, because it gets into the sort of the medical side. Medical side is all licensed, but personal trainers are just certified through like a certification. And I'm like preaching to the choir, I know, and I apologize for this is going to be like the longest video I think I've got this semester. But I think it's a really important point. I think you have wonderful questions, Gisette, and I want to kind of, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, so I love the way you phrase that. When you work harder, you're going to have to pay harder, greater oxygen debt. You're actually going to have higher metabolism. You can eat more. I mean, that's what I tell clients. hey, if you work harder, you can eat more. And they're like, oh, I can. And if we actually took like a heart rate monitor, and if you've never used a heart rate monitor, I know the iWatches have them. They're not quite as accurate. The better ones are always going to be the ones that actually read right off the chest. The tech for all this stuff, even though we're told, and this is also part of the fitness industry, we get marketed all this stuff and we just assume that it's accurate. But when I actually start to look the literature around some of these tools, they're not as accurate and they have some variability in them. So generally, I would say if you get an old school heart rate monitor, a polar heart rate monitor, just kind of sits on your chest around your, just below your pecs, right on your sternum, it's like $70, but you can start to track your calorie burn. And that's ultimately, then you would look at the calorie burn. If you left it on post workout, and I used to have my client do this all the time, she would take her shower with it. I mean, she'd clean around it and stuff, but she'd put it back on. She's like, I'm burning ridiculous amounts of calories for hours, days on end. And so she's like, I'm finding that I'm eating more and I'm still losing weight. And I'm like, there you go. So I think that's the way I've always sold it to clients from a fat loss perspective. It just gives you more calorie deficit that you have to eat back because you can't be in such a low calorie deficit that you're in starvation mode. Yeah, and I'm curious, incorporate that 30-minute workout, 30-minute high intensity intervals things. Ultimately, do it with weights. Do circuits, heavier circuits, 10 reps, 3 times through, a push, a pull, a squat, a vertical push, a vertical pull, a hinge, put a core in there, like, so you can start to be, and it becomes really efficient, but it's hard. You got to just build up capacity. All right, Bridget, moving on. 2 questions. Does creatine mostly work for hypertrophy or muscular strength? So predominantly strength, but hypertrophy tends, if you think about that, hypertrophy goes a little longer and has, if you look at, we haven't really looked at this, and I guess this is probably something we should get to, but the structure of a program, a resistance training program, your rest is longer in strength training, 2 to 5 minutes, because you're waiting for the ATP to fully reconstitute from ADP. You can take up to 5 minutes, and it usually, somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, depending on your availability of phosphate. So if you have creatine in there, you're going to be able to reconstitute ATP more quickly from ADP. Which many people say, hey, I can work harder. So now this is the catch-22, because hypertrophy is going to be a little bit more higher reps, less rest. So 30 to 90 seconds. So you might not get as much, if you're not taking creatine, you might not be able to get as much ATP reconstituted. So if you take creatine, it'll allow you to still work out harder. So it can work for both types of athletes. And usually hypertrophy and strength athletes are using it as a supplement. It always depends on the energy system, right? And remember, the energy turns on, the system turns on initially. So the phosphagen system is going to be utilized. The CP system is going to be utilized at some point, even when you start a jog, right? It's the initial one that turns on. It just depends on how demanding you are of that. If you're doing more sprint work, it's going to be helpful. If you're doing more resistance training, Olympic weightlifting, max effort strength stuff, it's going to be super helpful. How does caffeine consumption impact these cycles? It doesn't really. Caffeine is its own thing. It's a stimulant, has a whole different mechanism with how it operates. So what you're doing is the increased metabolism is really the increased heart rate. Because it's a stimulant, right? And again, if you consume enough of it over time, your body will attenuate. The receptor sites of the caffeine actually go into the cell membrane. So we have receptors in all of our cells have different receptors for different chemical compounds. Caffeine, we have these receptors that they kind of pop out of the cell membrane. And then what happens over time is we get accustomed to caffeine and it no longer has that effect. What happens is that receptor site has actually attenuated or kind of drawn into the cell, and it just doesn't get the same stimulation anymore. But the initial stimulation is a rapid heartbeat. That rapid heartbeat requires energy, requires more stroke volume, pumping blood around the body, and is what we would consider elevated metabolism. And how does it work? So I hope that answers that. So it can get you jazzed up and fired up. but it doesn't really tinker with the energy system unless you're actually in the energy system maximum effort. All right. Jungwa. Okay. Do different types of athletes benefit from different diets to train specific energy systems? More sugars for weightlifters or more fats for marathoners? I want you to think of calories. So I know we think of macros, and that's going to be macronutrients, are going to be carbs, protein, and fat. And alcohol is a macronutrient. It has no nutritional value, but it is a macronutrient. Fat has 9 calories per gram. Alcohol has 7 calories per gram. Protein and carbs have 4 calories per gram. So fat has twice as many calories, and it does require a little bit longer to break down. But if I'm a marathon runner running long distance marathons, running for 3 hours, multiple times a week, heaven forbid, we were checking today about ultra marathoners who are running like 100 miles right in one shot. The amount of caloric deficit that you're going to be in, you can eat anything. You can pretty much eat a house, and you're probably going to have a lot of fat because you need to put back that energy that you've lost. I don't care where you get that energy from. Post-workout is when we would want to have some really simple sugars. Especially for a weightlifter perspective, we want to have more 4-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein. That's what I was talking about. That skim chocolate milk has that ratio. So resistance training stuff, you're going to want to really any exercise, you're going to want to put some sugars back into your body because you've probably blown through some glycogen stores in your muscles, but your muscles can only hold so much carbohydrate. If you're talking about long distance, lots of calories burned, then you're going to have to refuel the system. Initially, it's best to get it with carbs and a little bit of protein, but over the course of days, depending on how far your caloric debt is or your caloric deficit is, you're probably going to find that fats are going to be something you're going to want to eat. But remember, fats require a lot more digestion. And so post-workout, that might not be the most optimal thing to take. Certainly, it's not pre-workout either. All right, Denitza, after watching this week's lecture, I became more interested in phosphagen, glycolytic, and oxidative energy systems and how they function. Each one works very differently, and I became very interested in how they produce ATP and why. Through this lecture, I was able to learn more about each system, and it covers just about everything I want to know. Okay, good. We're good. It's an easy one. I answered your questions. Adriana, I felt it was very important to bring up the marketing behind creatine. Many people burn through their whole paychecks thinking the more or the fancier the creatine, the better. Drinking lots of water and buying regular and not fancy creatine powder is enough and only having 5 milligrams versus the 25. Yeah, the mega dosing for the 5 days ahead of time, you don't really need to do. Supplement industries, unfortunately, it's out to make a buck. Most of the supplements aren't regulated. And so, it is kind of buyer beware, unfortunately. Vinny, what roles do the oxidative, glycolytic, and phosphagen energy systems play in synthesis of ATP at different exercise intensity durations? That's what the whole lecture was on. So go back and watch the PowerPoint. That's what we explained. All right, Sandy. I'm curious, if a person were to focus more on their lactate accumulation, metabolic acidosis, and cellular manifestations of fatigue, would they gain better results in their weight and muscle goals than they would by committing to a diet and daily gym visits? Given it's more complex, but would there be a difference in result? Like, how long would it take to see the differences in fatigue? So the only way to get better at improving your lactate threshold and lowering your incidence of metabolic acidosis and cellular manifestations of fatigue is by exercise. So you're in a kind of a catch-22. You do need to exercise to improve all that stuff. So if you're going to exercise, let's maximize your exercise. You don't need daily gym visits to exercise, though. So you don't need that. That's just a manifestation of a society that's been modernized to the point where we don't have any manual labor as our day-to-day work anymore. None of us are farming. None of us are out there doing, some of us, do construction and things like that, but most of us we're not like this physical job requirements anymore. So gyms have become really just fancy houses of fancy manual labor, which is really all they are. So again, it's going to depend on your goals. So if you want to get stronger, yes, you can do body weight stuff for a finite amount of time. But then eventually you're going to have to get in the gym because the overload that you're not going to be able to get enough overload, not enough weight on your body to make changes. Your body's going to sort of hit a plateau pretty quickly. You got to exercise to change all those metabolic markers internally in your ex-phys. And so, it's just be strategic with what you're doing and base it on your goals. Kevin, I was wondering how to do things like age or genetics. I was wondering how to do things. How do things like age or genetics affect the efficiency of these energy systems? I question this because I know other bodily systems, such as the immune system, can worsen and are very case to case regarding things like age, gender. So I was wondering if it's the same for three energy systems. So it's a great question, Kevin. Like, as we age, what happens? The energy systems still work, but one of the challenges with the aging process, by your third decade of life, you're starting the aging process, whether you like it or not. And by the sixth decade, you're probably losing up to 10 pounds of muscle mass and lean tissue over every decade of life. So because this concept of frailty, the loss of muscle mass, which in turn decreases bone mineral density, which decreases connective tissue and connectivity, which decreases overall strength, which decreases overall ability, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or basically it starts feeding itself. And one of the things is age. What we know is you can lift weights until in your 90s. We haven't done any studies on 100-year-olds, but I guarantee, actually, there was one article I read because I was looking for centenarians. We know in your 80s and 90s, you can build muscle mass. Now, are you going to look like you're 20? No. But you can absolutely restore all of the structure and have strength. And that concept of frailty can dissipate. It takes longer, right? Because we're older, things take a little bit longer. The immune system, all of that recovery stuff takes longer, but it can happen. And I found some research even with centenarians. So people that are 100 plus also can improve their overall muscle quality. And what we see at that level is just doing some basic exercise, strength training stuff. The independence goes up, psychology improves, like psychological wellness health improves, all this stuff improves. And then physiologically, fat loss decreases. We see muscle mass come back. We see just ability to kind of manage my day-to-day. That's all real positive stuff that we all take for granted at this age, but it goes. So genetics are always going to be in play. Some people can gain muscle very quickly. Other people, depending on your distribution of type 1 and type 2 fiber types, some people are going to be better at it than others. But aging is sort of this concept where it can be not fully reversed, but certainly this your bioenergetics shouldn't make any difference. And if you train more and exercise more, which again is really important to the human condition, all of those things are going to come online and be better. And we see people later on in life that are very active, that can do all sorts of wonderful things. And we sometimes applaud from the side, like, oh, the person know what they're doing. But that should be the norm. The norm shouldn't be falling off the face of the planet, not physically being able to do anything, having to rely on, medicine, all the medicines in the world. And I get it. Like, some people are like, look, I've got diabetes. I got to rely on medicine, but I don't want to have to rely on other things if I don't have to. And I certainly want to make sure that my musculoskeletal system can operate and function as long as I'm alive. So I've got to keep after this. I think that's we have this concept in the US that becoming old means you're going to be frail. And it just is not so. That's a false paradigm that I think we all need to really rethink, because that's just a matter of not being active. If you're active, and I'm not talking about crushing weights. Those of you that crush weights, wonderful. You're going to be like those super strong people in the gym much later in life. You're going to have a very vibrant life. But even just an element of activity is going to make a big difference in maintaining your overall structural systems, all the systems, including your immune system, including your bioenergetics, actually will work a little bit more effectively as well. Okay. Christian, how might the dietary recommendations for endurance athlete differ for those of a powerlifter, specifically in relation to carbohydrate and creatine intake, to best support the predominant energy system demands? Well, endurance athletes run a long distance, and powerlifters only are concerned about lifting something heavy once, usually 3 times in a meet, and they want to do the max effort. So the body shapes are very different. And if you're imagine trying to go for run a mile as a power lifter, or run a marathon as a power lifter. Your body is not designed for that. You don't have the mitochondria. You haven't developed your slow twitch muscle fibers the same way. Equally, put someone who's a marathon runner under a heavy barbell, right? They're structurally not going to be able to do it. And so don't think about eating, I think the challenge now, we're thinking it's like we know too much. Now we're like, we've got paralysis by analysis. Oh, now I can't do anything. I got to make sure I'm eating correctly, or I'm making sure the right energy system is being utilized. Just do the training. The training, if that's the training you like, you do the training. The rest of it will fall into place. Dietary recommendations for a power lifter, because they're going to be eating a ton of food, especially if they're a heavyweight, where their weight class doesn't matter. But then if you're really trying to get into a lower weight class, you're going to have to actually do some dieting and stuff like that. An endurance athlete is not looking to put on massive amounts of mass, because that's going to slow them down long term. So it's a fine line. But they can eat more. I will never forget, I had a colleague that was a marathon runner. I mean, she worked with me at a bar. She would eat like burgers and fries and chicken wings. And, we were all young back then. So like there was no cholesterol worries. But I mean, she had like the worst diet, but she was burning thousands and thousands of extra calories every day. So she could afford to eat like that. Whereas a powerlifter might be more concerned about the weight class that they have to enter, because if they can get into a lower weight class and be stronger, that's beneficial. So it all is going to be very, very dependent upon what the client's overall long-term goal is. Jonathan, the lecture you brought up the concept that on some level, max load power and endurance capacity are at odds with each other due to the effects of the muscles. Given each person is different, has different goals and needs, what factors go into finding the optimal balance? It's going to be personal. So personalized. Some people want to be a little bit good at everything. So that means you're going to cross train. You're going to do a little bit of strength training. You're going to do maybe some max effort stuff, and you're going to do your cardio. Some people want to just be strong. Like I never cared about the endurance stuff. I was always more interested in the strength stuff, and to some extent the hypertrophy stuff. I did cardio because I was like, I should probably do some, but that was never like my favorite go-to thing. I think that's going to depend on the individual and where they see themselves. But just remember, you can't be maximally anything if you're just relatively good at all things. So that might change over time. Your goals might change over time as you start to find, hey, I'm really, really, I have wonderful endurance. I just ran a marathon. I'd like to do something different. Maybe I want to, maybe I do want to do some max effort, or maybe I want to run like a Tough Mudder or some other variation that's going to require a little bit different energy system development. Jillian, not a question, but a statement that is wild learning. This is in the human physiology class, but it was so much better explained to me in this lecture. I feel like, thank you. This time it really sunk in, where before the Krebs and the Corey cycle, I was struggling with a bit, perhaps because it was presented in a much drier way. I found it incredibly interesting that we are able to train each system individually if athletes are struggling in one way or another with recovery in real time. All of the acidity and potential lactic acidosis in our bodies when working too hard makes total sense. And it's nice not just to have a vaguely lactic acid. I mean, everyone says, oh, lactic acid. It's not that. It's lactate threshold. It's lactic acidosis, the acidity that's increased or actually decreased in your bloodstream. The acidity is decreased, but the pH has gone down. The acidity is increased, pH has gone down. That's what causes can cause some serious problems, and certainly will be part of the rate limiting step. This lecture really puts into perspective just why rest times are so important, and why powering through and not taking the time to recover is not smart, especially if your goal is to maximize your strength. We can get away with that in cross training if we're okay with being more of a generalist across all of, I want to have some good cardio, I want to have some good muscle mass, and I want to have some, some decent overall strength. And then there's power, and we'll get into this later. But generally, if you can't, you do need your rest times, especially. And I would argue that we want to actually structure our programs over a period of the long haul that focuses and prioritizes different goals. And it could be energy system development, but predominantly not that. That's going to come with the territory of how we're training, whether it's power, strength, hypertrophy, or endurance. All right, Kenneth, a statement from the lecture that is is that different systems we learned, phosphagen, glycolytic, oxidative energy systems. Yep. Okay, so it's just more of a statement. Hey, Brian, for me as a swimmer, I'm better at sustaining a long distance endurance sets versus sprinting. It makes sense that my aerobic system was stronger than the phosphogenic glycolytic systems. But what's the best way to know which system is more affected? The timing of when the energy drops during a sprint. So we kind of covered this, I think, Brian, the first part of it, at least, in that it all is depending on timing and effort. And we can look at, again, the window, it's like 0 to 30 is phosphagen, but it's really probably 0 to 15. The most finely tuned athletes, and let's look at sprinters. You look at sprinters' bodies, they are powerhouses, big butts, big thighs, big hamstrings, big calves. Upper body may not be super developed, but sometimes often is. They are explosive for 40 yards or whatever their 100 meter, whatever it is. Like they're just explosive. But that's it, right? So their body is going to look different. They do plyos, they do power training, they do Olympic lifts, they do max effort strength stuff. They're training, and of course, then they're doing running and mechanical stuff with how they're striking and all of these little developmental things. Make sure their foot's working the right way. But that's the nitty gritty of a very advanced sport. You know, I'm thinking at the Olympics where you're working with very, very little tiny tweaks are going to be the difference between winning and losing. And we're talking, milliseconds. So sprint, if you want to be better at sprinting, you got to sprint, right? There's also this concept, which it comes out in a lot of my other courses that I teach and maybe hasn't in this class. You get what you train for, right? There's this concept that you have to train the way in order to get the result that you want, you have to train that way. So if I want to get good at bench pressing, I've got to bench press, not the whole time. Like I can do other things that are going to supplement the bench press, but I've got to be bench pressing. If I want to get better at sprinting, I have to be sprinting. If I want to get better at swimming, I have to get better at swimming. Now, also remember that the crossover between the two sports is very different. So that just because you're an excellent, let's say, endurance sprinter, swimmer, you can swim for hours on end. You're going to come out of the water now and you're going to go for a jog. And all of a sudden you feel like you're completely fatigued. You can't do it. And we saw this with Lance Armstrong. And I don't know if I mentioned in this class, I've mentioned in other classes, Lance Armstrong, forget the drugs and all the cheating and all that stuff. Like they all cheat. That's just the way it is. He just finally got caught because he was such a jerk about it and pretended he wasn't cheating, but they all cheat. That's just the way it goes. They've been cheating since day one, since the late 1800s, whenever the Tour de France started. There's old pictures of them drinking beers and smoking cigarettes, just trying to blunt the pain. So that's technically, performance enhancing. If you can blunt the pain and push through it, that counts as something. I wouldn't recommend that now, but all the other drugs, yada, 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 you get it. The point I'm trying to make is that Lance was an exceptional, regardless of the drugs, his trained really, really hard, exceptional sprinter in high elevation. And he had the highest recorded VO2 max. VO2 max is that ability to use oxygen maximally. So he had the highest recorded VO2 max of anyone that's ever been recorded. He was really effective at utilizing all the oxygen that he was breathing in. So you would think, cool, he's like, I'm going to run the New York City Marathon. So I was, oh, he's going to kill it. He's so awesome. He's got the best VO2 max. Well, it's a completely different sport. He has been good at sitting on a bicycle, standing up on a bicycle, and his body literally is shaped in the form of a hunched over bicyclist, right? Like he's designed his body through practice to be better at propelling a bicycle. So now he gets off the bicycle and now he runs a completely different sport, different mechanics, different everything. And he does terrible. He doesn't do amazing. He places like a regular person. His body's not used to it. So swimming cardiovascularly is great and wonderful. You've got fluid resistance. That's the other interesting thing, right? There's some friction in that fluid resistance, but it's not nearly as much as kind of the wind resistance. Let me rephrase that. It actually is different than wind resistance. And you have to work a little harder in a different way. But now when you stand upright, right now, you don't get to use arms and legs. You're using just lower body. And yes, there's some of that contralateral patterning that we mentioned before, but this is all new. And now you've got to use your legs in a completely different way that you would in swimming. So there's going to be a big difference. So what system is going to be more affected? It's always going to be based on the intensity and the duration of the exercise. You thought about this relationship between energy system and mental focus factors. For instance, if a high BPM, beat per minute song, got someone to go faster while cycling. Would the music be triggering an increase in energy system, or would the person just be pushing through energy deficits and increasing the risk of lactic acidosis? Correct. They would be able to push a little harder, right? There's also this piece, but remember, it's hard to push through lactic acidosis. When you're there, it's going to be burning. But if you've been training, your ability to buffer lactate and pyruvate and all that stuff just gets better. So talk to me about the person who's deconditioned and put on, AC/DC Thunderstruck, right? Or whatever's your jam. I don't care what you're pumping through there. You could have AC/DC behind them playing and they're sprinting. I don't care what happens. That person is not going to make it because they don't have the development, the exercise phys development on any level to be able to power them through acidosis. There's just no way that they can tolerate it. They're going to fall down and throw up. But there are, when we get better trained, we can tolerate more stress, longer bouts of stress, and maybe we push ourselves a little harder. And that threshold that margin is a little bit smaller. So your lactic threshold is here, and maybe you're here, maybe you go just a little bit higher and you're pushing that. Well, yeah, that's fine, but you don't stay there forever. But guess what happens? Now you got that little bit improvement over the next time, right? So yes, the music can help propel from a psychological perspective, but it still comes down to the physiology, right? The physiology, to some extent, is going to dictate, utter ability. Now, if we're kind of bagging it a little bit and that music is something that pushes a little further, that's possible. We talked about that in the previous chapter, I think chapter 2. But the physiology is going to trump everything at the end of the day. All right. This is Gail, how does knowing which energy system you're using help you train smarter or recover better? I think we talked about a lot of that already, so I'm going to just keep going. Is it pretty funny that I would tell people the same thing about creatine being the most studied supplement and they still have doubts whether they should take it or not, and if it will benefit them? Well, it'll definitely benefit them. And as I was typing out, if they're strength training, but if you're doing endurance training, if you're doing endurance work, there's no benefit to it. So, it depends on what you're taking. You got to make sure you stay hydrated. You got to make sure that you, don't overdo anything. But creatine definitely works, and we know it works. Another post, Aiden, you had, after going through the lecture, I thought it was interesting to learn how our bodies use different energy systems depending on the type of exercise. It made me wonder how the body knows when to switch between them, like from ATP PC system to glycolysis or oxidative. Can we train our bodies to get better using our specific energy systems depending on the sport we're doing? I feel like understanding this better could really help improve performance, especially if you know which systems to rely on most for your activity. Absolutely. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. Yeah, you can definitely train the energy system specifically. I think that's it. All right, page 2, making some headway here. Okay, Adam, if I were training an Olympic track, if I were training an Olympic track and field athlete, and the events they focus on is the 100 and the 200 meters, which energy system is our primary focus? So go back to the time. How long does it take to run 100 meters? 100 meters is like a football field, right? So if you were to sprint across a football field, and it will always depend on their overall speed, let's just use a high level athlete. Let's say they can run a 4.5 for the first 40 yards. So let's just say that's 40 meters, because a yard is about a meter. It's slightly smaller, I think. So it is what it is. Let's just use that. But then we got the remaining 60. So 4 seconds for 40. If I run another 4, let's say 4.5, let's just say 5 seconds. So 10 seconds, I've run 80 meters plus another 20. I'm still within the phosphagen system. If I go to the 200 meters now, it's going to take a little bit more time. So we're going to get into fast glycolysis. All depends on the time and the intensity. Oswaldo, creatine is a supplement I would recommend all athletes use, intermediate or advanced. I think everyone can benefit from it if they're eating proper nutrients in their meals. You can find creatine in red meat, but you won't be able to consume enough. Creatine can help produce ATP. Creatine can help reconstitute ATP from ADP. And does everyone need to take creatine? No, it depends on what they're performing. High intensity training, Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, Yes. Endurance work, cycling, sprinting. Yes. Cycling, long distance stuff, cross country, downhill skiing, not going to benefit from this stuff. Okay. So don't recommend it for everyone. And also be mindful as personal trainers, if any of you are working towards that, we don't recommend supplements, even though creatine is one I will recommend, but it depends on the client. Joshua, the presentation on exercise training and bioenergetics emphasized the complex interactions among phosphagen, glycolytic, oxidative systems, comprehending the rate limiting enzymes. Yep. This led me to the question how genetic variations can affect the effectiveness of adaptability of these systems, as well as how customized training programs might incorporate these differences. So we've talked about programming already. We could train to the intensity, duration, and focus on energy system development. So what the genetic portion, remember that the energy system stuff is pretty, at least from my perspective, I haven't seen a ton of research on this portion of exercise phys. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but generally, and when I go to conferences and things of that nature, no one's talking about how certain people have different energy system development. Everyone's got pretty much the same stuff. The VO2 max, the overall ability to maximally use oxygen is genetic based. Half of it's trainable. And I think there's some research that's saying even less of it's, or a little bit more of it's trainable. So maybe it's 60-40 trainable to genetics, 60% trainable, 40% genetics. So some people are going to be able to just do more work capacity and be better able to adapt their energy systems than the others. But it's ultimately comes down to training and maximizing your ability. The other piece of this, bigger people with more muscle mass. So let's just say genetic variability. Bigger people with more muscle mass are going to require more energy to move themselves, right? So they might be more wind resistant. They might be biomechanically less efficient, or they could be biomechanically more efficient. So it's difficult to say, at least from where I sit at this point, that genetics are going to play such a significant variable in energy system development, unless we're talking about that upper echelon of athlete where any little percentage factor change is going to make a big difference. But most of those people are going to have optimal genetics right out of the gate. Remember, you don't pick your sport picks you. You self-select out of things you're bad at, athletic-wise. You stay in the things that you're good at because your body, either structurally, shape-wise, physically, it works for the way you're built, or you won't do it. You'll self-select out. So I think it's important the genetic variations in the energy system, not really going to have all that much variation, at least from my understanding at this level. But certainly the way someone is genetically gifted, having more type 2 muscle fibers, being stronger than someone who has maybe more endurance muscle fiber types, type 1s. And that's all going to be based on sort of family history, lineage, genetics. So you might get, someone might be just, I'm a better long distance runner. Well, yeah, no kidding. You've got more type 1 muscle fiber types. You've got more mitochondrial density, slow fatigue muscles. Whereas someone who's more muscular or stronger, more powerful, just naturally is going to be like, yeah, cardio isn't really my jam. So there's this element of self-selecting out, and then we sort of have to train that way to maximize it if that's what our goal is. All right, Scott, one of the interesting things that this lecture to me, one of the more interesting things about this lecture to me is the hydrolysis of ATP breaking the terminal phosphate bonds, because this is similar to cosmology theory and breaking of hydrogen bonds in hair to allow it to be dried or into a style using heat dry the hair. Back in 2003, I attended cosmetology school, and the theory really stuck with me as the breaking of the hydrogen bond is one of these concepts. There's a lot of similarities between the two. It makes me curious to know what other molecular bonds that hydrolysis is used to break. It's good to know that skim chocolate milk is a good way to replace glycogen, because I love chocolate milk and I already have some skim chocolate milk. Perfect. You've already got it. It's also very interesting in researching and learning more about the excess post-oxygen EPOC consumption. So, Scott, unfortunately, I don't really know where I would see a lot more of that hydrolysis other than in the ATP bonding. The one thing I know that, and I don't know if it's hydrolysis, I know that protein, so a lot of people talk about eating more protein, and I don't have any citations off the top of my head, but it requires more energy to break the bonds of protein from a food perspective than carbohydrates and fat. So what we find is a diet richer in and I don't know if that's hydrolysis or not. So I'm just saying, talking about how these energy bonds might have some other influence. This is the one thing that's coming to mind. Having a diet that's a little higher in protein might not necessarily because you need it to build more muscle, because most of us don't have a protein deficiency, but it can enhance what we call the digestive energy expenditure. So eating food approximately takes 10% of our energy to break it all down through chewing, digestion, mastication. So the chewing, the digestion, the moving it through the gut, through the digestive tract. But if the diet is richer in protein, it's going to take a little bit more energy than normal because of I think it's covalent bonds, if I recall correctly, that hold protein together. And it just takes more energy to break those bonds and crack them. So a little different than hydrolysis, but kind of another example of chemistry and the importance of biochemistry, right? This is all like nutritional science stuff, which is not my forte. We are, this is where I would say for everyone, go if you really want to know about the nutrition stuff. And all these questions are wonderful, but really not in the exercise physiologist wheelhouse. You want to go talk with, we have fantastic registered dietitians that work at LA City. If you ever want to take an intro to nutrition course, you'll learn about all this stuff. But the covalent bonds of protein can burn, kind of be more effective at increasing your metabolism, your digestive, basically the calories that you're required to digest your food. So that would be an area different, but something. Good question. Thank you, Scott. And then the last one from Cynthia, a rather niche question. So having done water polo in high school, I was aware that chocolate skim milk post-workout can be amazing in helping you not crash after an intense workout. I'm wondering if there are any other drinks or small snacks that one can have immediately after a workout that are as effective, or is chocolate skim milk magic? Number one thing, you have to support your energy after a powerful workout. It is magical because it's so inexpensive and really effective. That's why it's magical. But you could have something else that has 4 parts carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates. We love the sugar in chocolate milk, skim chocolate milk, no fat, right? That's the big, we don't want fat post-workout. And then the milk itself has its own protein. So we get about a 4-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein. You could do that with anything. You could take, dates and put some dates in your protein smoothie. So anything that has that recipe of about 4-to-1 carbs to protein, with the carbohydrate being as simple as possible. In an ideal scenario, that'd be glucose. Glucose is what we use immediately. If I consume glucose, it will be absorbed. I don't even have to digest it. It'll be automatically kind of put into the places it needs to be put to replenish my glycogen and my blood sugar, and then any stores in my liver. So it doesn't necessarily have to be chocolate milk. The nice convenient thing about chocolate milk is it's already done for you and it's cheap and it's delicious. But some people are lactose intolerant, excuse me. And so chocolate milk doesn't work for them as well. You would just want to make sure if you're going to use almond milk that it has enough protein in it, because sometimes almond milk doesn't have as much protein in it. All right. Whew, that was a lot. Thank you all. Maybe I'll make this the lecture for the week. I think that's a good one. And times it's already 11. So I got to figure out what else I'm going to do. All right. See you soon.